This is exciting. I'm excited waiting for this. It's cool, right? Oh, I can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Oh, now I can hear you. Now I
Yeah,
can
you
hear
can hear me, but I don't think anyone can see us yet. Oh, it's probably just, yes, there they are. Here we are. This is what everyone has been waiting for. Ron and Adam. But this time it's Adam and Ron. All those times I've been on your live stream.
It's so true.
And you really taught me how it's done, including manipulating all my friends to do retweets, guilting them, harassing them.
Is that what I do? Would you say when I DM you that I'm harassing you?
Only when you DM me after I already retweeted you. And I know your system doesn't account for that, but it's annoying. Because like you, I get, there's enough. Good, you said?
Good. Annoying is not a bad thing. Do you know that? Because annoying sinks into you. So annoying is a bad thing, but annoying can be a bad thing if it's antagonistic. But if you're saying to yourself, this is in good spirit. Adam is being annoying, but it's in good spirit, and you recognize that I'm not trying to be a bad.
No, I'm gonna listen. When I say annoying, it's like it's in the manner of love, in the manner of affection. Of course, you know that. You and I have spent many hours together, more online at this point than offline, but plenty of time offline as well, exchanging ideas. Why don't you, Adam? First of all, believe it or not, you think everybody knows who and what you are. And when I say what, I mean why we would care who you are.
Yeah.
But not everyone does. You've just been kind of this internet, this Twitter Periscope personality now for the last year or so, really coming on strong. Last couple of years, I guess, at this point.
Yeah.
But what's your, before we talk about the Ron and Adam backstory, let's talk about the Adam backstory, because even when people ask me who you are, I say, well, he's this, that, and the other thing, and let's get it straight.
So I'll give you and everybody else kind of a quick bio. Right. And I am capable of giving a 3-hour bio because I don't know when to stop. So I'm going to give you kind of the abbreviated bio.
That's generous of you.
Yeah. So I knew very young that I wanted to go to Wall Street. I knew I wanted to go to Wall Street as a kid, even before I knew what Wall Street was. Okay. So I knew as a kid what my skill sets were and what I wanted to do with them. And I knew that I wanted to, kind of break out of a lower middle class existence, right? And so that was kind of my purpose in life. So I didn't really care about school. I think kids shouldn't care about school either. I think it's a very bad thing. It's kids are persuaded that the proper route in life is to go to school and then get a job. I knew as a kid that the route I wanted to take would I would get to the job that they were in college trying to acquire. I would have that job by the time they graduated. I would have that job. So it really worked out. So I went as a kid to PS41, went to Friends Seminary, and
PS41 in
Midtown.
That's in Midtown. Okay, Midtown Manhattan, folks.
Well, it's lower. It's on 14th Street. It's on 11th Street. Muhammad Ali used to come to our school. I love Muhammad Ali. He turned me on to boxing. And
when my father grew up on 2nd Street, so he would have called 14th Street Midtown. But
I grew up on 4th Street. We're on 2nd Street. We're on 2nd Street.
Like we're on 2nd Street. I mean, my father was quite a bit older than you.
Okay, well, so I grew up on 4th Street and Avenue A.
All right, I got to run that down.
Okay, and I was born in 1966. So I knew at a young age that I wanted to go to Wall Street. I went to good schools. I was bored with the schools, not because they weren't kind of satisfying me intellectually, but I didn't think that they would be helpful in my career, and that's really what I was focused on.
You were focused on a career as a young child?
Yeah.
All right, that's why you made money. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I was very lucky. So, I can't suggest that the route that I took can be franchised out, right, to every kid. But I knew what I wanted to do, and I didn't want to wait. I didn't see any benefit to me to waiting. And I know kind of the mythology is you have to wait till you're 18 years old and then you can get a job and you're working. And that's somewhat true, but that doesn't mean that the time between 14 and 18 can be squandered. So once I hit like 18 years old, I spent a lot of my time, actually 19 years old. Nancy gave me a book on Wall Street, and that was it, right? That's what I knew I wanted to do. So once I turned, around 19 or so, I knew it was time, and I spent so much of the years before in the Manhattan Public Library for Business. Do you remember that library? It was dedicated to business. First, it was on the
No.
Okay, so first, the Manhattan Public Library on 42nd Street had a dedicated section for business, and back then everything was microfiche. Do you remember that? Okay.
Sure, I do remember the research from researching things on microfiche.
Yeah, and it was
Scrolling.
But it took effort, right? It took sweat. It took a mental sweat to do it, right? So if you're going to do that, you're going to optimize your time doing it, because it takes so much effort to do, right? So I would do that. I would take notes, and I cold called into Wall Street. I cold called into a bunch of firms that I wanted to work for, and it was a choice between Goldman Sachs, ultimately Prudential, Gruntle, pretty much everywhere. There were some firms that certainly didn't want me, and then there was some firms that did. And I think the reason that they wanted me was because I was young. Isn't that crazy?
You were still in school.
They wanted me because I recognized that there was an alternative path. And every company, every corporate that knows they're going to be around in 10 years also knows that they need to attract and retain the best quality employees. And I knew that at the time. So I was kind of pledging my loyalty. And when you don't do it in such, it's not kind of a formal, maybe it's understood, it's a cordiality, right? That you know that they're expending, and I knew it at the time, that they're kind of adopting you in a certain way, and that I knew that I would have to adopt them in a certain way.
Do you think what you're describing would be possible in 2021?
I think it's different. I think it's much different, because back then you had proximity. So back then,
physical, geographical proximity. In other words, you were in New York.
Well, yeah, and it wasn't just that I was in New York, but if I wanted to hang out with the boss, I could literally, I used to just sit in their office, because again, I was annoying, but I knew that they would understand it in the way it was, so that they would come to love me. As part of my annoying, they would understand that that's just an eccentricity, part of my personhood, right? So
where'd you start out? So where'd you take the first job?
I took the first job at Gruntle. Actually, I had some training jobs before then. There was a process. There was just a process to go through. And then I went to Gruntle. Gruntle did very well. I made one of few professional mistakes, which was I went to another firm. I took a big package. It was a very large package to go to another firm. Gruntle loved me. They really didn't want to see me go. And I had a little bit of wanderlust. And I felt that I kind of mastered that art, and I was making a ton. And so And
what kind of work was it? What was it, being an analyst?
Yeah, I had my own team, which was an analyst, a researcher, and a cold calling team, and a trading team. So after a while, back then, you used to be able to build up like a little fiefdom. And when I say we had our own analyst, we had the analyst at the time, who was—
This is the early 80s, right?
This is late 80s. I got to Wall Street around 1987. So I got to Wall Street a month before a crash. And so I was very lucky that I had Rick Withington as an analyst. I used to sit in his office all the time. He was doing semiconductors. And, I don't want to bother you or anybody else with kind of the story of semiconductors, but I used to just sit in his office. And then, the CEO of the company, I used to sit in his office. Steve Cohen, who then, went on to become a big guy, obviously. We used to talk about this all the time. And just as I was sitting in people's office, so Steve Cohen was sitting in people's office also. And back then, you could do it because you had proximity to your CEO, you had proximity to the executives. So, and what I mean by that is, if you were taking the elevator at 7 o'clock in the morning, they were taking the elevator at 7 o'clock in the morning, and you could be in the elevator, and they know the trick, right? They know what I'm doing, but they understood it and they appreciated it. And if I was there at 8:30 in the morning, they would be there. I would try and kind of mirror what they were doing, but no matter what, I would sit in their office. I would, bring them some food, whatever it was. I don't think you can do that today. I don't think that same kind of route can
hard to believe. Yeah, hard to believe.
Subversion type of route can be done today in the same manner. You know, one of my mentors, co-founder of CNN, I speak of him a lot because I'm so proud of him. He was a mailroom clerk, and then he moved up and ultimately became the founder and the co-founder of CNN and the founder of the Food Network. I don't think you can do that anymore because you don't have proximity to Mark Zuckerberg. You don't have proximity to Eric Schmidt. You don't have proximity to the executive officers of these companies. And the companies have gone much wiser because they've created very large buffers and bureaucracies between the executive staff and kind of the plebs. And they've done that because the plebs have become such terrorists, right? The contractors, the employees that they have become such terrorists that they're always looking to sue. They're always looking to be social activists. And, you know, they're always looking to kind of be a terrorist within the company. They're always plotting how to fire their manager. They're always plotting to kind of conquer by kind of maliciously defeating the hierarchy of the company. And so the companies, in order to insulate themselves from that risk, the risk of the employees, has created this enormous buffer. And they've had to do this because look at what's happening with Spotify as an example. Joe Rogan is not going anywhere. He's a revenue producer for the company. And you've got these little twerps that want to bring social activism because they feel they have some collateral. Reality is that they don't have collateral. The CEO knows that. CEO of Spotify and the CEO of Google, CEOs, you know, they know that these employees don't have collateral, but they've been waiting for opportunities to fire these employees and get distance from them and turn them all into contractors. Because once you turn them into contractors, they lose any type of political capital, and they also lose proximity to their coworkers. So they won't be able to kind of, in some way, informally unionize themselves and have some type of a collective bargaining. And so I don't think—
Or in other words, to develop a culture, of the non-executive class, or even the middle management class, whose values and priorities are not those of management and ownership.
A good company has to be a dictatorship, right? And it can be kind of a benevolent dictatorship, but ultimately, whoever founded the company, whoever took over as the CEO, it's their company. And when you're working within a corporate environment, and this is, you know, we're going to have a bunch of dysfunctional kids on UBI, Universal Basic Income, because the thing is, in a corporate environment, it's very rigid, it's very hierarchical. So, you know, when people are in the military, right, they understand that there's a boss, there's a boss, there's a boss, there's a boss. You can't escalate things. You go your way of, if you have some type of a grievance, there's a certain process. There's a way of communicating things. There's a formality to the language because you know that whatever email you send is going to be circulated.
Okay, so this goes back to one of our many conversations. You have repeated this rubric before about why are Ron and Adam not meaningfully censored on Twitter. And you say, because we know how to color within the lines. We know how to work within organizations. And I wonder how true that is, though, now in a world where you have guys like Vindman, who is not even a general officer, a military officer who decides that he's going to bring his idea of policy, of institutional administrative policy into the White House and countermand the president of the United States. And that guy becomes a celebrity. And that guy, and there are no negative consequences for him. And this is something we saw throughout the Trump administration, is that people trumped Trump. People, now that might just be an unusual situation, but isn't that also what's happening as corporate America becomes woke? Is it the CEOs who are doing it, or are the CEOs responding to powers, to forces within their companies that make them believe that they have to do such absurd things as use massively obese women as underwear models?
So I have believed for many, many years, and I'm sure I'm right. And a lot of people would say I'm wrong, but I've been right about everything, and they have to cherry pick what they're right about. So, so I would say that I think culture is downstream of politics. When you've got an
the opposite from what everyone else says, in other words.
But everybody else is wrong. So when you've got an economy that's $20 trillion, okay, it buys a lot of things. As we're seeing now, it buys a lot of things. And despite people's claims of fiat money and this and that, kind of idiotic, childish, sophomoric and sometimes soporific type of arguments, they're wrong as well, because my bank accepts that currency. So I would say that, they're printing we've got a $20 trillion economy, and it buys a lot of things, it purchases a lot of things. So when you're speaking of Vindman, I don't think that's a fair example, because what you're looking at then is
that's a non-market environment.
Well, he was, he successfully succeeded. He was like an aspirant to the elite class, and he succeeded. Now, the issue then is because there are always going to be more elite aspirants than there are positions for them to occupy. So he, in this intra-elite competition, he was one of the winners. So I think his ambitions, other people's ambitions, aspirants to the elite class, have been thwarted, and his was successful. So I don't think he's a good example.
Okay.
I think you and I are probably better examples, because you brought up Twitter and why they're generous to us to let us stay for the time being. I think you and I play within the rules and are very aware of the rules. And I think that many of the people who've been kicked off, and I see that Bronze Age Pervert, who I never followed, but I have some familiarity, I suppose, kind of in a kind of peripheral way, I suppose, with them, wasn't very disciplined in his language. And you're going to have this become a much bigger problem generationally, because these kids will not know how to communicate in kind of a structural way. So they're really going to be handicapped by those who understand hierarchies. And you're creating a separate class now of W-2s, which are the kind of elites within Amazon. And remember something, there's an inelastic supply, right? So you're going to have the elites within Amazon, Facebook. You're going to have elites within this extrajudicial system that Biden has certainly created. And then you're going to have this other class, which has to be kept as contractors, because they threaten the organism of the company itself. And the company has to keep away from that type of headline risk. So, is what it is. But you and I kind of understand the rules. You live by those rules. You understand them, and it's a part of the kind of the fabric of the way you communicate. And I'm sure you are always aware of what you're saying in the moments before you say it, and you select the words appropriately. And you're aware of how these words can be understood. I try and do the same thing. Most people don't, and it's only going to get worse. And particularly as language is, there's no longer any agreement on language. So somebody is going to say a word like supposedly, and it's not going to be understood by you and me. And you and I will be very intolerant of it, and that's not going to change. So, there's a whole bunch of problems, and that language can be communicated on Twitter as well, but it's also, by communicating that type of language, it's also very quickly going to identify which caste system they belong in. So, the world is a changing place. Exciting times. Exciting times.
But before we completely forget the hyperlink, several clicks ago, you are on Wall Street, you're succeeding, you're building a practice around yourself. You end up being a vice president or a partner in one of these esoteric firms.
Yeah, so when I sold the firm, I started my own firm, I sold my firm. When I sold my firm, I didn't want to go back to Wall Street. I did very well with it. I didn't want to go back to Wall Street because I still have that kind of pursuit, right, of what makes me happy. And I don't like repetition. I don't like pattern recognition. So I wanted to do something different than the same things, and just because that's a problem with Wall Street is, these hedge fund managers is they're always trying to relive yesterday's glory years. And fortunately for them, they have that opportunity. But there was a big span of time when they didn't, and the markets were not favorable to doing that. So I wanted to do something else. I became very active in what's called Silicon Alley. which is where Jason Calcanis started and Fred Wilson started.
Sure. I remember those days.
I was active in a lot of the companies with them and investors, and some of them did good, some of them didn't. And then one of the companies that I became a very early investor in was about to go public. I had given them a small loan. I wanted to take on the sales position for them for a whole bunch of reasons. I got into it. I had a lot of rights to the company prior to the IPO that I wanted to exercise. And back then they were franchised. They wanted to disenfranchise themselves. So they were acquiring all of them. And I took on that role. I wound up also starting a company and selling it to them. So it was an outsourced accounting company. I knew where the gap was in their offering, and I built a company to sell them. I pissed off the CEO very badly with it because I got greedy, learned a lesson in life. Don't piss off people who love you, and don't get greedy. So I left there. Ultimately, after 6 years, our stock went from $20 to $2 a share, and then from $2 a share to $60 a share. So I did well. Went to work for a good friend of mine. A big mistake. Don't work for good friends of yours, but I did an investor series with him. We're close friends, but you learn that lesson. And then China went public in 2012. So did Workday and a couple of other companies I was very engaged in. I didn't want to do any of that type of stuff again. So I just became a very active investor in a whole bunch of things outside of those companies. I didn't see any opportunity to do those companies again. There's no way you can build a new TriNet. There's no way you can build a new Insperity. There's no way you can build a new Workday. So back then, I knew surveillance was going to be big, something that everybody is now aware of. I was very aware of the transformations from the intel agencies to the private contractors, because intel agencies don't have the staffing that they had anymore, that they used to have, and those quality employees were being attrited out. There was just a whole bunch of things. So I knew that Facebook was becoming kind of an outsourced NSA, which is fine. I think they're much more responsible in that role. And I became very active in surveillance, very close with the NSA, very close with Bloomberg, very close with In-Q-Tel. Everything worked out well. We got very involved in India. And I'm trying to abbreviate it because then I'm going to talk too much.
Okay, so consider it abbreviated. You got into you were on Wall Street. You did well. You built things up. You did entrepreneurial stuff. You made missteps, but you made a lot of steps that were not missteps. You've got money. You use it, and then you became this sort of independent observer and analyst and journalist in the classic sense of you've been keeping your own journal.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that. So I don't think I foreclosed on investments to become a journalist. I don't even think of myself as a journalist.
No, I actually mean the journal that you keep for yourself. Not journalism with a capital J, but rather what you have spoken about many times with me on air and off.
Well, I knew many years ago. I knew back in Wall Street days, and then back in the Insperity days when I had responsibilities to the shareholders to improve earnings sequentially, that I knew that ultimately there's going to be conflicts because a company can only improve earnings so much without making a lot of moral compromise, without making a lot of ethical compromise, and without firing a lot of employees to gain some operational excellence and improving processes internally so much that you get so many basis points improvements, and then firing employees. So back then you could reallocate employees, but these days with a lot of artificial intelligence and a lot of machine learning, you can actually instead of reallocating them, you can just fire them. So I knew 20 years ago that this was going to lead to where we are now, which is a demand for absurd earnings improvements sequentially, and that you can only do so much. And I saw that the people I knew who were politicians were just getting too rich, and there was just too much lobbying going on. And all of a sudden they had more money than close friends of mine. Their apartments were nicer than mine. And I couldn't understand how that could be. And, they were just living beyond their means. And, Robert Barnes and I have a common nemesis. And that person was living well beyond their means. And it's always it's a leading indicator, I suppose, of detection of criminal fraud or a fraud when somebody has an extravagant display of wealth. And that's what was happening. So,
Somebody in politics?
Particularly in politics, they were just there was no longer any constraint. And so I saw, as a shareholder in these companies and as an executive in these companies, I saw the demand for earnings. And look at somebody like Travis, right, from Uber. And what drove him to his kind of malfeasance was all the stress. And then all the stress to produce a unicorn with significant returns. And then he brought on an executive team that that rather than would constrain him from this moral kind of deficiency, would instead enable it further and contribute to the fraud that was occurring in a fraud that cascaded down. So, and then Travis was replaced. And, I think you still have this challenge. So when I see that a lot of companies are, we're doing open immigration and all this, I know that it's to improve their earnings. I know as an investor and as an executive who's been on both sides of the marketplace, that they're looking to improve earnings, and this is a dangerous thing. And I knew this moment would come. So I've been recording this moment since about 2015. I've been observing Amazon. I've got a team actually that has joined me. Something just happened. Oh yeah, cool. Well, that's just part of it. He was hiring employees that were stealing trade secrets from Google, and then bringing, he paid somebody hundreds of millions of dollars to steal trade secrets from Google and bring them over ways. They were doing what's called a God view. They were getting special, what's called entitlements from Apple, which permitted them to keylog your phone. So on Apple was giving them special privileges that allowed them to keylog, which is,
insane.
Capture the screen. They were doing a lot of wrong things, and then they employed a lot of Obama executives to get them out of trouble. And it's a whole bunch of things. One of your favorite people in the world, Eric Holder, David, Eric. Yeah. So, but I don't want to complicate things too much.
Yeah.
But so what you're seeing now is kind of this confluence of all these interests, and it's interesting. So I've tried to observe it and share with people what's going on. And I remember you and I spoke, before Trump, lost his seat, and I said, Trump's going to lose. And I did that deliberately to watch your reaction. I did the same thing to Will Chamberlain, who's an awesome guy. I did the same thing to Alan Bukhari, who's an awesome guy, right? I would test them. And I even sent Alan that meme type of thing of that person screaming no because Clinton had lost. I said, don't let this be you. And I warned you also, don't emotionally invest so much of yourself that you're going to be emotionally depleted when Trump loses. And it is what it is. I like what Lee Smith has described. Lee Smith says that we've been conquered. I like the way he says that. Lee Smith is awesome.
Yeah, and what was it? What about? I mean, Lee Smith said what about this?
Lee Smith in a I think it was a DM chat or a text chat that he and I gave me kind of new ways to visualize it, which is a good new ways to visualize it, and also new ways to kind of ponder it, and also ponder it in my mind, but then also kind of have it cross the transom to the real world.
Well, what threw me for a loop, Adam, wasn't in and of itself Trump losing, because I've been involved on different levels, but always emotionally in politics for a very, very long time, and I'm used to disappointment. What did throw me for a loop was the utter failure of so many institutions that could have prevented. I'm not saying YouTube. I'm not saying that Trump won the election.
Understood.
I'm just saying that a lot of things went really, really wrong, and people who had the responsibility to put a brake on them refused to do so. And that made me two things. It made me really lose a certain amount of idealism that I had about the system that I work in. And it also made me a little bit less committed to the values that that system espouses, even in its idealized form, to slightly different things. Because I see that it makes me think that the cynicism and lack of authenticity and the lack of honesty is so deep that it makes me, to quote a Ross Chast cartoon, this makes me doubt everything you've ever said before, which I think is a not a line that she invented, but it's where I first saw it. In any case, yes, so you saw all this coming. You were saying you saw this coming a couple of years ago, based on your kind of. So I mean, in the process of doing the work that you did over the years, you became a sort of social observer.
Well, I would say that I was sharing my thoughts, and I recently went through kind of a purge of my Twitter because I know that I'm very vulnerable to getting kicked off, and and Twitter's terms of service are very asymmetrical in
Yes.
that they reserve the right, and reserving the right means they can or can't, right? That's what reserving the right. They can kick you off, or they can't, or they don't want to kick you off. But either way, they have that right to do so.
In theory, right. And in practice, in actual practice.
Yeah, I was going to say in theory and in actual. And I just don't want to have that vulnerability to either of my flanks, because I do want to share with people and I do enjoy Twitter. So I went through a purge, but in that purge, I didn't delete anything that was significant in any way. It was mostly just comments to people. It was making sure that there was no DMCA violations, right? Just making sure that that the obvious transgressions that might make me vulnerable were gone. And I since 2017, when I really came onto Twitter full force, I've been sharing these things. I have always worried about the militarization of the police. And this was true under Trump, and it was true under Biden. They're both kind of, if you take a look, I was so opposed to Trump saying we should bring the military in to attack Antifa in Seattle, right? And Jack Posobiec even said, these are not Biden people, these are just real insurgents combined with real issues. And it was a lot of infiltration. And I said, if you bring in, and then the riots that were going on, and I'm not commenting on the underlying social issues in any way, I'm talking about insurgents that introduced violence into the mix, right? And they do so for Republicans, they do so for Democrats, right? And Jack Posobiec wrote a really good book about this. So, because those are their tactics, right? So, Trump, I remember Trump saying he wants to bring in the military. And I'm like, once the military's in, as you see with the green zone in DC, military never leaves. Once the military set up that green zone in DC, people were now behaviorally conditioned to see that. So when it was somewhat dismantled, now people are already behaviorally conditioned to see it kind of replicated from city to city and from DCer to DCer. And it's gonna get worse. It's gonna get a lot worse. So I've wanted to share these things. I've always worried about the militarization of the police. Yeah, it's a really good book. Do you know something? I've got it. It's in my other shelf because I finished it. And I don't leave it on my coffee table. It's on my other shelf now. The book I got Mike Stern with this book here. I share Mike's book on. So I've used Twitter to kind of share these things, but I've used Twitter and I continue to use Twitter, not as much for other people, but I do it kind of selfishly because I have a lot of difficulty, as we all do, taking all this jumble of thoughts and kind of having it cross the transom into something that is intelligible outside of my own head. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
So Twitter has been very helpful for me to take all that jumble of thoughts, all these kind of neurons that are firing, and all the stimulus.
Neurons, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounded like you said morons.
Oh, no. All those neurons that are firing, all the sensory and the way we're all being overloaded by media, and to be able to kind of process it, but also to be able to explain it. So, for example, the term fastest roll-up of power in history, I think is elegant, and it's elegant for me because it gives me a contextual framework. I like the way, give me 1 second. I like the way Lee Smith describes.
Wait, what's the term again?
The fastest roll up of power.
Fastest roll of power. Yes. So who was it? And who was it who always used to say that? Who always says that?
That was me.
That was you.
I can tell you. Do you know how many how many citations I get from people's PhD works these days? I used to get like 1 or 2 a week, where people actually wanted permission. I guess it's required for their citation to say that. I'm like, are you serious? Are you serious?
No such thing.
Yeah, just say it. It's very helpful for people. So I like what Lee Smith said about a conquering force, and I think that's a good way to explain it. And I mean in terms of the belligerence. I'm not talking about legitimacy or illegitimacy or kind of this or that, but the belligerence that we're all subjected to is hostile, right? It's a hostile regime. So, is what it is.
Speaking of, so now to counteract that belligerence to some extent, you thought it would be fun for us to talk a little bit about how you and I started our conversations on your famous live streams, and you wanted to tell that story.
Well, I thought it would be interesting. So I think the first one I did 2 that were solo, and then I wanted to do one with Alan. I've been wanting to do one with Alan for like a year and a half before that. I was waiting.
And how many have you done with Alan?
I think 3. I did one on his. I think he did 2 on mine. I did one with Chuck, who got awesome, and I did one with him solo. I did 2 with you solo because it was before Trump won. I wanted to help people emotionally disengage, right? I wanted to help people remember to invest and that the world's not going to end when Trump loses. And I wanted at the same time to discuss what was going on. But I also thought it was very, very interesting. At that time, it was that those children at the school, that school that had kind of betrayed its own students and its alumni, and it was the kid with that red cap who had a
oh, you mean the Covington kids?
The Covington kids. I was so fascinated by that, and not just the legalistics of it.
That's me with Alan.
Yeah, Alan's awesome.
He's great.
Yep. He really is. He really is. And so I was fascinated by the Covington kids, the betrayal that the school had. I was fascinated by how they, how they had to, how the media was able to,
completely turn that into a counterfactual narrative. I mean,
it was interesting because what they did, and you can see that it became a trend. It was already a trend, but you see that gave it kind of some moral authority. Is they took that adolescent, and they took those adolescents, and particularly him, and it's really kind of at the point where he was at the last kind of concluding stage of his childhood. So they caught him deliberately at this moment when he was completing his kind of adolescent process, right? And his identification was going from one to the other. So they caught him at a time when other kids at the same basic age as Greta, right? That was no coincidence, because his identity, the media wanted to make, was no longer an identity of playfulness. It's no longer identity of childhood and kind of the zest of youth. And they wanted to give it an evil characterization. And it's no coincidence that they took him at the same age as they took Greta. So I thought it was just really fascinating. I knew you were doing stuff with it. I knew later on, we had discussed a little bit offline. I knew that you were, I had expected you to become more engaged with that. So I was really fascinated by the Covington kids. I was really fascinated because at that time, social media had not yet gone into where it is now, right?
Right.
So it had not yet kind of inched itself forward to really now where it's really clearly an encroachment of constitutional rights. I'm certainly not a constitutional scholar. I'll let other people negotiate that type of stuff. But clearly an encroachment of the way people communicate, identify, the way they congregate, the way they collectively share ideas. So, you know, and you were really, you were at that time were probably the most authoritative, had the most authority into your commentary. Robert Barnes as well. I think Robert Barnes was more kind of case specific.
Yeah.
While as you were kind of looking at things kind of more system in that case. So we did one. It was so much fun.
Was that the one that went 3 hours? Or 2 hours or something, and I wasn't ready.
I think the first one went like an hour and 10 minutes. That's when I was a lot more disciplined into. And I think the first time that I started running over was like with Darren Beatty. I think it was the number 2 one, and that was because people have a lot of questions. And I'm a huge fan of Periscope. I still am. I think it's the best way to engage. And even though Twitter has made it a little bit more difficult, it's still the most frictionless platform. I don't like Zoom, which is what we're on now, because I feel that it's a destination in itself, and I feel that it's got a little bit of friction to go over to Zoom. I don't like YouTube. I don't like the terms of service and kind of the enforcement that YouTube has and the fluidity of how they define these terms. I think they're the worst. I remember Mike Cernovich saying a year ago, Twitter, if he was like talking about censorship and what the media permits, and he was said, listen, Twitter is the most generous. I've never forgotten that. And I've seen that. And I'm sure you've seen that also. Twitter is by far the most generous. So I try and keep away from YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, and I think, you know, people talk about alternative platforms. They will always be alternative platforms. This is where the conversation still takes place. And that, you know, that is not likely to change in the near term. Things that, and I mean, speaking of predictions, and because believe it or not, I'm a little bit more disciplined.
Well, can I just add something to what you just said? It's very important. Yeah. And I just retweeted our thing, by the way. I forgot to do it before. But I think it's very important to understand this. I was very anti-Parler. I'm very anti-Getter. I'm very anti-Gab. I don't think that's the solution. I think that's the problem. I think that's kind of a cowardice, because I, as kind of a normie, and you as a normie, and most of us on Twitter who engage, I would say Jack Posobiec, right? Jack Murphy, they might have certain personas that are a little bit edgy, yeah, but they are very much normies, right? They're very much normies. They're just kind of fringe normies, but you know, they're normies, right? Jack does. I want to stay on Twitter because I've got so many great people here. I don't want to go to those sites where it's just a bunch of people who've been kicked off for sharing crazy memes.
That's right.
And so those things are kind of honey traps. And they can never succeed. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's Getter. I don't care if it's Trump. I don't care what it is, because the demands of Congress and the legislation of Congress and the enforcement ability of Congress demands so much kind of expense on these social media companies to employ artificial intelligence, machine learning, to staff up basically with thousands of contractors to be able to kind of teach their AI, to be able to shut off things automatically. So there's never going to be a substitute for these things. So even, you know, Clubhouse, and I like Clubhouse. I know Mark Andreessen is in there, and you know, I know a bunch of people are in there. Clubhouse is either going to have to conform, or they're going to have to be either acquired, and that would be part of their conformity, or they're going to have to close up shop, because there's too much headline risk, there's too much legislative risk in that business model. So there's never going to be an alternative. But now a person needs to stay within Twitter, and you can only stay within Twitter if you abide by their rules. So I feel that I have enough of the command of language, and I know you do as well. I don't need to use curse words. I've got curse words are kind of idiotic substituents for kind of thoughts, right? It's not even a shorthand. The curse words are for idiots, particularly on Twitter, where you know that you're operating under a microscope. So when I see people who are saying, I'm going to use whatever foul language I want because this is free speech, they're idiots. They're absolute idiots, and they're jeopardizing everybody. but I just don't want to use that language. I want to stay on Twitter. So, I know that people's friends created Rumble and all this type of stuff. I know that Darren did incredible on Rumble with this thing with Tim Pool, 2 million views, and I'm a huge fan of Darren. And he gets a little carried away sometimes. Nevertheless, real type of a discourse and kind of dialogue can still happen on Twitter.
I think you're right. I mean, look, to be very clear, you can do nothing wrong whatsoever and be banned from Twitter. These are the cases, though, you could argue that actually prove the rule, which is that by and large, I'm suing Twitter and I'm here having this conversation with you on Twitter. They do not have to let me on Twitter.
Sure.
I can say Ron Coleman is a class enemy. Ron Coleman is simply an existential enemy.
No, I don't think they think that. I've been in business. I don't think they are underestimating the potential of a threat from a Ron Coleman. I don't think that they feel that there's any reason. Again, the new, and I've warned a lot of people that the new terms of service is going to be a little bit hazardous to a lot of people on Twitter, particularly with DMCA. And I've even looked you up. I've looked you up on Lumen to see what type of violations that. So I would say, and that's one of their kind of lines of attack. And it's them also being terrorized by the media companies, right? So it's also them being kind of vulnerable to their on their flank. So I would say that they reserve the right to enforce a rule or not to enforce a rule, to interpret it the way they want. They also reserve the right to that you are basically, by using Twitter, they've indemnified themselves from any type of commercial loss. I mean, this type of stuff from a commercial loss of a client. So you can't sue them and say, because they kicked me off, I lost all this money. And they can kick people off for no reason, but you're not a threat because you're not trying to hijack the platform. So the thing is with these people, and I don't know this guy, Bronze Age, I don't know any of these people, I don't know that guy Warhan from Xenos, whatever that guy's name was, who was one of the early people kicked off. But these people, I remember all of them in 2015 saying, we get more traffic than, CNN, and, we're going to show the world how it's done, and the old days of CNN. I'm like, you guys are idiots. They're going to kick you off. They were hijacking the platform. Ron Coleman is not hijacking the platform. Ron Coleman is not hijacking the brand of Twitter.
I suppose you're right. That's a way of looking at it. I mean, the reason I'm suing Twitter, however, is precisely because of someone who I think wasn't doing that, but who was a threat, was too powerful, but who was a really high value target. Which is Rogan O'Handley, who has 3 million followers on Instagram. So he wasn't as influential on Twitter. But
Rogan O'Handley? I've heard the name. Is that the guy that did the Proud Boys?
No, Rogan O'Handley, not to be confused with Gavin McInnes. Rogan O'Handley's DC Drano. And that's the lawsuit.
Why did he get kicked off? And I know that you've got that lawsuit. I had heard the name, and I'm certainly not challenging the merits of it. You know this stuff. You're obviously, right? Why did he get kicked off of Twitter, though? And if you can discuss whatever.
Yes. No, I can. No, we love to talk about it. What happened was he was. They made I'm going to actually do a screen share on this so people can follow along at home. So in 2018, the state government of California created the Office of Elections Cybersecurity to educate voters with valid information on election laws and procedures. And they ended up becoming a political weapon for censorship. They, leading up to the 2020 elections, at the direction of government employees at the California Elections Cybersecurity Office, they told Twitter what tweets to remove, which Twitter did, and then they actually told Twitter to remove all of his tweets. And in February 2021, or to several of his tweets, in 2021, Twitter permanently suspended Rogan altogether for tweeting, quote, most votes in American history, which was meant sarcastically, obviously, but is not hijacking the platform. So the Secretary of State who is responsible for operating this bureau. This was a tweet, by the way, that was made well after you see here, there's a screenshot here of one of the Judicial Watch had gotten a whole bunch of these emails. And here on 11/17, DC Drano says, he claims California is a culprit of voter fraud and ignores the fact that we do audit votes. This is a blatant disregard of how our voting process works and creates disinformation and distrust among the general public. In other words, they didn't like what he said, and they even thought it was false. So they said, take that tweet down. That's just censorship, and that's by the state.
Yeah, so what happens with this is, again, we're in the transformation of our people, and I want to get to that loss in just a moment, but we're in the transformation of our people operating system. And as you know, I speak Mandarin. I've also been discussing China and the China Communist Party. And I want to distinguish between the Chinese Communist Party and China.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned this. Was something we definitely have to get to before our hour is up, which is soon.
Okay, so I've been discussing them as a leading indicator because I saw what was happening there, and I saw that our own elites wanted to employ kind of our equivalency of that type of regime. So now and I had this conversation with Michael Anton recently, and now what's happening is, and I'm certainly not challenging or contesting any part of the election, so I want that understood. And I certainly accept it, and I want to make sure that my words are not misunderstood. But now we're at the same point where the Chinese Communist Party and our own United States government have to present themselves as infallible, right? And you're now challenging your entire challenge the way I just read it. And you're on the legal battle of it. So, but my just informal observation of the skirmish is that the government wants to present itself, and California wants to present itself as infallible. And I think that's a fascinating case that you've got. I think it's fascinating. I'm very interested in keeping.
Yeah, keep an eye on it. And you see, and by the way, why did a guy like you, who's on top of so many things, not know about this case? Because it has not been reported.
Okay, that's not bad.
Well, it's bad. It's not the end of the world.
Well, it means you can't get the weight of popular support, but you're not supposed to get the weight of if you want to be a dissident that a kind of a Vaclav Havel, right, that stays within the system, right, as Vaclav did, then if you want to be a Havel, you're going to write beautiful poetry, right, or you're going to chip away at the way you're doing now.
That's right.
The same thing that Ron. But look, Ron Kuby was doing that 25 years ago, and you take a look at. I knew when that guy Andrew McCarthy was prosecuting the woman who was representing the one-eyed terrorist, right? The one who was the one who was responsible for the initial bombing of World Trade Center. Right?
Oh yeah, okay. Oh yes, right. Yeah.
And he was the prosecutor, and they were literally just making stuff up about the woman who was representing him. I'm not saying.
Oh, right. So that they could monitor her conversations with him. Yeah.
And they were just making stuff up. And I gave money to it, but I became aware of it. And I'm not saying that she wasn't treacherous. That's a different argument. That's a completely different argument. Right. But I'm saying that you still have to play by the rules, right? So I think it's important that you're playing by the rules and you're chipping away. So I'm very intrigued by the case. But as a dissident lawyer, they're just not going to permit you the weight of popular support, and that's to be expected.
That's right, and that's the world we're living in. And to the extent that Twitter, in its generosity, whatever the motivation is for that, allows us to even have the discussion, I accept it gladly, because we do have to raise funds for that case, and we do have to make people aware of it. Adam, we owe it to you as our guest and a guy who's busy, and to people who I try not to overtax. Not like that trick you pulled on me. To keep it to an hour. I think this is actually the longest discussion I've had with anyone, but that's not surprising because you've got so many interesting things to say, and you and I always have a terrific time.
How long have we gone?
It's been 56 minutes because we started at 2:02.
Does any of your guests, I'm not sure if you can see questions, but I want to be responsive to other people because I'm so appreciative that people hopefully may have joined us on this.
Well, then I would have to check YouTube for that.
Or Twitter, right? Can't you see these things on Twitter?
I'm not really seeing questions on Twitter.
You can see them. See, I'm a master of this stuff.
Yes, you are. That's true. There's that. Okay. So, hey, Ron and Adam, do you think the current medical insanity is
okay,
more...
hold on. Let me just shut this. Let me just shut. Now I can hear you. I was trying to get into that thing. So can you repeat what you just said?
Yeah. Hey, Ron and Adam. Actually, I'll share the screen too. This way, this is a little bit strange, but let's make sure I'm sharing the right screen. I think it is. Okay, so there's, hey, Ron and Adam. Do you think the current medical insanity is more about big pharma profits or power and control? That, of course, has nothing to do with our discussion, but we can...
Okay, so I think it's important for everybody that they not speculate, right? I think it's important that people don't speculate about the origin or about kind of tactics and kind of conspiracies one way or the other. I think it's important that we just kind of, in this instance, that we just kind of live in the moment and we kind of observe what's going on now. And I think the other important thing is that you're going to expend a lot of emotional energy kind of in this kind of pursuit of truth, maybe, because you're never going to find it. So, you know, I'm certainly not saying people should take a vaccine, not take a vaccine. You know, this is some people have immunosuppression disorder. So I certainly don't, you know, I'm not a doctor. I don't know what people's medical conditions are, but I don't want to speculate. I'm trying to keep a log of the fastest roll-up of power in history, and that includes a lot of things. It includes the Black Lives Matter protest. It includes so much stuff. It includes all the kind of the intellectual hazards that we experienced from 2016.
And it includes Big Pharma, presumably.
Big Pharma has been a part of it for a very long time. Big Pharma in 2019 and early 2019 committed $10 billion to their advertising spend for media, okay? And a big chunk of that was going to go to social media and to the social media spend. So not only that, but pharma is also spending billions of dollars on these doctor-patient groups on Facebook. So I don't, and Facebook has been there's been a cordiality that Facebook has not, since 2019, since mid 2019, Facebook has not permitted any type of real conversations. And I don't know the conversations, so I don't want to make any suggestions, but they have been very quick to shut down anything that appears to their algorithms as anti-vax. And so now we're in a place in 2021 where pharma has a bit of a asymmetrical advantage that a lot of the systems and infrastructure for shutting down argument about vaccines and other things were actually architected in 2019. So in 2019, they committed to a $20 billion spend. In the middle of 2019, as they started allocating the money and spending the money for 2020, part of their budget was in social media. Part of their budget was traditional media. Part of their budget was experiential type of stuff, which is like street type, it's a whole different type of thing. And another several billion dollars was to doctor-patient advocacy groups. And then, of course, there's the regular several, $100 million plus in lobbying. And so, for us, I think we can't get lost in things that are unresolvable, right? I think we have to fight the battles that can be fought, and I think can be successful. For example, right now, where they're making dissidents kind of an enemy of the state, but they're not defining what a dissident and an enemy of the state is. All that ambiguity is hazardous to my health. So,
and that's something we can push back on. That's something as a practical matter we can push
absolutely.
Back on.
100%.
So let me just, since you seem, I mean, if I'm gonna, read questions, and I have one from what appears to be John Hayward, the great John Hayward, who says on YouTube, remind me, guys, what's the name for the system of government where political parties control private corporations and use them as instruments of compulsive force against citizens? I think I know what he's talking about.
Okay, so Chris Hedges came up with a phrase years ago that I really liked, and I'm so glad that now I finally get to use it. And unfortunately, I'm also so glad that I finally get to use it, which is he calls this an inverse corporate totalitarianism. I think that's very interesting. So, I'm kind of an authority within certain things. I'm a specialist within certain things within China. Obviously, as people might know, within the family, I have a family office. We have a lot of financial investments that are bearish on Chinese Communist Party. We did very well with the fall of the yuan, everything else. So I have a lot of familiarity both with the diplomacy that they use and kind of the apparatus. And in China, it's government infiltrates the largest companies. Tencent is really a front for their political elites. And China Exim Bank, which is kind of on this expeditionary force to take over the world through these horrible opaque loans, is really what appears to be the elites and laundering, for the elites, and it's really the elites employing. So the Chinese Communist Party has a different, it's a different people operating system, and there the elites infiltrate the companies, and they do so using many tactics. So recently, people have become aware of TikTok. The founder of TikTok was also the founder of ByteDance, and his earlier company, I'm going to call it Taocaw, so that people have an easier time finding it. I'm going to have to get my battery, so hold on for a second. So hold on.
Oh, the last time Adam did this, it was on his live stream. I took the opportunity to talk to people alone about how I'm working with him, and how I think that it's important for people to understand that a lot of the things Adam says, they're part of the therapy, they're part of the treatment, and as a community, we owe it to him to help him out, listen to him, and help him through this time. Okay, yeah, you were saying about you and the Chinese party.
Let me continue with that, and I really appreciate the question. So in China, the infiltration is top down, right? At a certain point, so ByteDance was Yiming, who was the CEO of Yiming, and one of ByteDance's companies, as they were investors, was a company called Taocaw. And I'm using kind of an Americanized way so that people can easily find it, right? And it's Tautaio. So the way they took over, the way the Chinese Communist Party took over is they employed the same tactics within their own governmental agencies. They said that the videos that were being shared, because it's very similar to YouTube, the videos that were being shared were creating a lot of social upheaval and social dissent. And it was basically the same issues where we have here, where it's unsanctioned user-created content, right? So, in China, in the Chinese Communist Party, because they're reformulating the country and its operating system, they have something called the four consciousnesses of Xi. And what that is it's the four ways in which every business and every person has to show kind of an adoration for the Chinese Communist Party. And it looks at business and it looks at everything else. So Yiming did this entire confession on their equivalency of Medium, right? Kind of the place where people nail their confessions to the church door. Right? And he expressed his sorrow for violating, and specifically the four consciousnesses of Xi. And shortly thereafter, he left the company, and then he founded TikTok. And just so you know, sidebar is there's a reason TikTok is basically soft pornography for young boys, and which is really what it is. They always have a very beautiful girl, right? That's Chinese propaganda, incidentally. That's how they're delivering messages, so that it kind of radiates out. So in the United States, it's exactly opposite. In the United States, these governments, if you take a look at the way what Groundworks was, which was the Google spin out, essentially a spin out, which was designed to capture all of this fragmented information that Google collects, and that all these other repositories have collected, Twitter, all the big data that is essentially that's been collected into all these repositories was then going to be consolidated into groundworks so they could do very specific micro targeting, right? So rather than just go after soccer moms, they could kind of customize ads, and they could also inform their artificial intelligence, which, if I recall correctly, was called Ava, and it was supposedly supposed to tell Hillary where she should be campaigning and what type of people even should be joining in it. So we would even say, bring white women in their 40s with you to shake hands on behalf of Hillary. So Google has created a revolving door into government. So they've been very involved for the last 7 years, actually now 9 years, in Center for American Progress. They really infiltrated that. They've been very involved in the Clinton Foundation, very involved in the State Department, and it's been kind of a revolving door. So the way that these companies infiltrate is kind of bottom up, while as in China, it's top down. But ultimately, you're getting to the same place, which is you have one political party in the United States. You're allowed to have other political parties in the United States, but only under the agreement that they not be adversarial, right? You can have the Republican Party. Only
they can't win any elections.
Well, they can win elections, but they can't be adversarial. So China.
Oh, okay, I get it, right.
Yeah, I mean, none of this is new. So one of the things I've had to do in order to be able to make sense of the thoughts that are in my head is I've had to read a lot of Machiavelli, a lot of political science. I've had to read a lot of Thucydides. Everyone should read Corsair, the book 4 of Thucydides, which is Corsair, which is what their civil war was, because a lot of this is 2,300 years old. The distortion of language, the distortions of the meaning of language is very, very old. So I've actually been fascinated watching it replay here, as well as politicians employing the same tactics of popular appeal. It's just very interesting. So Google and all these companies, they get to the same place, which is really where they want to get to. And it also gives you a leading indicator of where we are going to get to.
Adam, I don't deserve you.
Yes, you do. I don't deserve you.
It's been a great discussion. We did.
One more question. Look for one more question, because I know we pinged a lot of people. Just see if there's anything interesting.
Let's see here. Yes. Gulsher asks.
And I appreciate that question from John, by the way. And if I recall, actually I do recall, he and I really have to meet in the city, right? We really do, because we're like distant cousins almost.
Really?
Turns out, yeah. Well, we're not. I said almost.
Oh, you're like distant cousins almost. That is pretty hedgy looking sounding. So Gulsher Qureshi asks, it seems, actually more of like a comment. So he says, it seems the political environment has calmed down without the agitating words of the orange man. You seem correct about hijacking the platform. 2 separate comments, really. He says that the orange man agitated words. I think he actually kept alive a certain amount of, I think there's more censorship is actually taking place now than took place when he was president. It's that, if you call that calming, it's calming.
If I recall Gulcher, and I know that they've joined others, if I recall correctly, they're Muslim, and I believe they might live in Toronto. That might be correct. And if they could type in if I'm correct, and I certainly appreciate it.
If he's still with us, that question was asked a while ago.
Yeah, and so
Toronto, it's ironic, right? So Canada, they've been really.
Canada is a leading indicator, as is Germany, as is Australia. So they are basically doing what I think I've seen Jack Posobiec say about other things. They're basically doing A/B testing on messaging. So really watch out what they're saying over there, because once they do the A/B testing, they're whatever was successful, they're doing over here.
Yes, and Justin, actually, my producer wanted me to make sure that I asked Justin's question, which I was also about to ask. How long, and I know what your answer is going to be, how long until the social credit score becomes reality? And Gulsher, by the way, he's Australia, Sydney, Australia, good guess. He doesn't really want us to know where he really lives. Just kidding, Gulsher. Justin Bergman, how long until the social credit score becomes reality?
Okay, well, we have to define what the social credit system, it's not a score, what the social credit system is. And that's got to be really understood. And I'm not going to go into kind of the plenaries and the 14th Congress and a bunch of other things. the plenary that introduced the idea of the social credit system, and how it's how the repository for all that data is then collected and put into the social credit system. But I think what's more important is what our version of it looks like and why it's really a problem. So in China, because of the type of people operating system that they have, they've always been able to define what the ideal citizen is, right? They've always been able to define and coerce that behavior. And so now they've kind of codified that. So they've always been able to kind of, they've always had tactics to be able to kind of enforce that and to preserve that and create social stability. Social stability meaning, this is what a good citizen does, this is what a good citizen doesn't. However, in the United States, there's never been an agreement of what a good citizen is, right? A good citizen, some people look at it as kind of a constitutional, right? Other people look at it as kind of a liberal issue. There's just a lot of ways that people imagine and a lot of iterations of what a good citizen was. So you and I grew up where community, the definition of community was people with divergent views who could get along, right? That was the definition that you and I grew up with of community. Community has been kind of reconstituted to a group of people where everybody has the same thought. So now what's happening in our social credit system is America and our elites have defined what a good citizen is. And now they are instrumentalizing that behavior. And that's a real danger. And they're using corporations in the same way that the Chinese Communist Party is using corporations. And they're doing this for many reasons. Number one, in China, they use corporations. So the social credit system really is intended to target companies over there. And that's so they can get to, because the companies are the ones that touch the employees the most frequently, right? So in the United States, it's the same way. Because most people can be touched by companies, their employers, right? They're targeting companies to kind of, they're permeating companies to kind of, to cascade it down, this type of a group thing. So I would say that the social credit system, we're already here. We've been here now for about the last 4 years or so. When you took the first protest against Trump, were really beyond the deplorable that Jack and Mike Cernovich did, was really Me Too. And Me Too was very instrumentalized. Behaviorally, it was something we had never seen in the United States before. And it resembled the protests of 1968. However, in order to be a good citizen, it was the first time I've ever seen this, you had to wear the pink hat. And that accessory defined the quality of your citizenship.
To the point where a judge felt comfortable going onto the bench and wearing that hat while presiding in court. It was deemed to be such a non-political political statement. It was essentially the equivalent of the Great Seal over the head of the judge sitting in court, which is, as you know, and no one stopped her. Adam,
I want to continue with that question for 1 second. It's important.
Okay.
So, but now the problem is, what do you do? So in China, and again, I want to distinguish between Chinese people and the Chinese Communist Party. People are not their ruling regime. So I want to make sure that that's understood. So in China, the question is now, what happens to people that don't have the virtue, right? Because the virtue has had one meaning in China, it's had one meaning in the West. And now our definition of virtue has become identical to that of China. The definition of virtue in the United States used to be somebody who had this type of they would speak out upon their own morals, even if there was a conflict with the way society wanted to restrain them, right? And now virtue is somebody that just abides by the current ideology and kind of its expressions. So now the question is, in China, what happens to people that are dissidents, or that, let's just say, that have a low, you wanted to use the word credit score, so I'm going to use, as a convenience, I'm going to use that same word. That's not it. It's Google the four consciousnesses of C. Google that and put that up. It's really interesting. So now the question in the United States is, what happens in China to the dissidents who had low scores, or whose the artificial intelligence would indicate that they're a peril to the ruling regime, or that they'll create social instability? Well, we don't know. And I can tell you that my worry is that just as the 2008, the Beijing Olympics, and the later, I think it was 2009 Shanghai World's Fair, a lot of that was used, I believe, to create essentially camps for Uyghurs. And I think that now we're not having there's no oversight as to the facilities and the camps that China is building. So presumably as hospitals. So I think that they are, yeah. So I do worry that the dissidents are being disappeared. And in China, the entire judiciary is appointed from the Chinese Communist Party. So it's not like it is within the US. The system is subservient to the Chinese Communist Party constitution. So now the question is, in America, now that we have some type of formation of an equivalency, what will happen with dissidents?
What will happen with dissidents in the United States, in other words?
Well, we've already defined what dissidents are. Dissidents are people now who are challenging the utility of vaccines, right? And I think I saw Jack Posobiec yesterday tweeted that he suspected that internally within the White House, they're using the language of terrorist, right? We saw the leak that Darren Beatty got, that he put on a Revolver, which was from the Department of Homeland Securities, where they defined something as basically a patriot. And within patriot are people who challenge the way government is spending money, people who challenge the constitutional authority of the politicians are exceeding their constitutional authority. And and remember something, Martin Luther King was prosecuted for tax fraud, right? That's always how they get you.
Right.
And
so now they're pulling licenses from lawyers who take aggressive litigation positions, which are no more aggressive than the kind of garbage litigation that has historically been part of political claims. If you were to go through the pleadings in Bush versus Gore, you would find things that are they're sanctioning people, they're sanctioning Giuliani with no hearing. So these are these sort of marginal but very significant ways of getting their arms around what you describe is the measures to contain non-virtuous, non-conforming conduct.
Well, I had two conversations with Jack Posobiec about this. And it's interesting because I asked him how Antifa was going to metastasize, right? Antifa is not going away. So how is Antifa now going to, how is the phalanx, what's the phalanx going to be chasing now? And he said exactly what you just said. He said that they're now going to be going after kind of this judiciary type of challenge, basically as this, I'll use my term, maybe like a militarized appeal force in itself. So the same thing that we saw in with the court resolution of the disposition of that guy who was found guilty of being on somebody's neck and killing Derek Chauvin, right? And he thinks now,
oh gosh, yeah, okay.
Now that they're going to go after PTA boards and judiciary, kind of the judiciary, exactly like you said, where I guess the Giulianis will get attacked on by the bar, right? And beneath that will be the Antifa type of militias that will go after the PTAs and will go after the actual decisions of those judges and intimidate the judges' ability to kind of make free decisions.
Sort of like a Red Guard type of phenomenon.
Well, Red Guard,
as of the Cultural Revolution.
Well,
but not top down necessarily.
I've tried using the red guard as an example, and I've been corrected several times by people from China who follow me through VPN and who I know in China as well. And they don't want me using the example of the red guard because of the horrificness of the red guard and the amount of violence that occurred. I can't say whether we're going to have that same type of violence.
But if it's a matter of degree, I mean, just like everything, I understand that just everything, that sounds fascistic isn't the next Holocaust.
I would say that what you're saying, and I agree with it, is that where people, particularly the middle class, right, is stripped of any type of political, social, legal type of currency, and there's a helplessness. And then you get a violent force that comes in that is granted certain privileges, and you're using that as your description of the Red Guard, which I do agree with.
On that happy note, we're going to go into the weekend. Adam, fantastic as usual. We could do this all day. Jeremy, I know, must have other things to do today, our producer. It's been great talking to you. I hope a couple of people enjoyed joining us. I hope we do it again soon. And thanks for all your tips on live streaming. We wouldn't have those people without you, I'm sure.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
So long, everybody.